Welcome to this DecisionWise webinar, Managing the Employee Experience While Returning to Work. I hope everyone is doing well, and like me, hopefully we're all excited for the future as we begin this new frontier of returning to work and the new normal of day-to-day life. My name is Justin Warner, and I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing here at DecisionWise. I'm grateful today for today's guests because I've called on them a lot over the last couple of months for webinars and podcasts, and they've been very gracious with their time and their expertise. So our panel today includes Matt Wride, who is the president of DecisionWise, Christian Nielson, Vice President of Consulting, and Dave Long, Vice President of Assessments. Guys, thank you again for being here. Thank you for all your time and expertise that you've shared with all of us.
Good to be with you.
So before we begin today's webinar, I do have a few housekeeping items that I want to take care of. So first off, our webinar is being recorded, and you can watch and can be watched on demand on our Bright Talk channel, as well as on our website, DecisionWise.com. Additionally, this webinar counts for 1 credit hour of both SHRM and HRCI credits for everyone who meets the viewing requirements. Later today or early tomorrow, we will send an email with the codes to all the participants who have met these requirements. If you are watching the webinar on demand and are in need of the codes, please email us at info@decisionwise.com or click the Contact Us on our website and let us know that you are looking for the codes, and we will provide those to you. Lastly, I want to just give a little bit of information. The state of Utah, where our office is located, began reopening 2 weeks ago. And as of this past Saturday, groups of 20 are now authorized to meet together. So the DecisionWise management team has begun creating our plan to bring employees back to work. And while the DecisionWise employees are not yet back to work, we have gathered together in a large conference room, socially distanced, so we can have this webinar together. So please forgive us if it sounds a little bit hollow. We are in a big room so that we can do this webinar for you. Lastly, we do welcome your questions. On the panel, on the Bright Talk panel, there is a question panel. Please submit those questions throughout the webinar, and we will try to get to them as we go. And if there is any time remaining at the end, we'll try to address as many of the questions as possible. So, Matt, with that, I'm going to go ahead and just kick this over to you and let you take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Welcome. We're glad to be with you and to spend the next 50 minutes or so trying to provide some guidance on ways to strengthen the employee experience while bringing back the workforce, or at least a portion of it. Up here on the screen, we ask ourselves, is this how we finally feel? And I don't think that's the case. What you'll see here are some pictures. There in the woman's hand is this one of the fastest selling items on the internet. It is a little keychain, and it attaches to your keychain, and it's a tool used for opening doors, pushing buttons on ATM machines, whatever you need it to do to try to give you some way of not touching things. And as you can see, employees are still wearing masks. They're still dealing with personal protective equipment, plexiglass structures, and so on. And so it's not everyone's back to normal. It's a phased-in approach, and it's going to be a challenge for a while. Safety is paramount, and we're going to spend a few moments on this topic. We break it down into both physical safety as well as what we call psychological safety. And with that, I'm going to bring on Christian Nielson to kind of talk a little bit about physical safety and some of the tips that we have in that regard.
Yeah, in a few slides, I think we're going to talk about some overarching priorities for considering bringing people back to work. And safety is going to be the first thing we talk about. Health, safety, the well-being of our employees. People are paying close attention to how they feel, how the organization is treating them during these very unique times. So safety, and just to kind of set the tone, we'll return to this concept a few times throughout the conversation, I imagine, as well as I would expect we'll get a number of questions that come in around this item. But talking about safety, thinking about through physical safety as well as psychological. Physical safety, are we thinking through what's necessary for the right equipment for maintaining safety? I joked a little bit that I should have invested in plexiglass recently, because everywhere I go, I'm seeing sneeze guards and things like that. But it's a good example of we've had to change some of the equipment that's in the physical environment to create more safety for our employees. Guidelines on distancing. What's our policy? What are we expecting for our interactions, especially if we're client or customer facing or patient facing, depending on what industry we're in. Creating physical environment, as I mentioned, where it allows for distancing. We've seen some organizations change their office structure so they actually, have one-way cubicles. Like if you need to go this direction and this is the flow of traffic, just to kind of limit some of the interaction or crossing people in the hallway, that type of thing. And then being especially sensitive to at-risk populations. We have some folks that are dealing with different reasons or personal situations where they're perhaps immunocompromised, elderly populations, asthma, those types of things, and other people that are more susceptible or at risk. Those are some considerations in this entire conversation, not just setting up our office, but also in terms of phasing approaches and making exceptions for different populations. Thinking through the psychological, now so there's some overlap, but some people are craving that connection. I think we've all been in this quarantine period for so long now that even the strongest preference for introversion are starting to miss some human interaction. I might be overstating that, but we all have different preference and needs for interaction and or seeking that at different levels. But that's something we need to consider and factor into our approach, this desire to be around other people. Concerns over the economic viability and job security. If we're talking about psychological safety, there's people that are really nervous about this disease and the impact on their health and the health of their loved ones, but also the real economic impact. Do I have a job? Is my company going to be successful? Are we looking at reduction in force? These are real considerations that are on people's minds more than ever, and it's something to consider as you think through your plan to bring people back into the office, as well as just continue to manage through this time. Again, at-risk populations, why we put that on physical and psychological, because this is on our minds. Even if we are not necessarily in an at-risk category ourselves, we have friends, we have loved ones, we have people on our teams that we're concerned about. And so just making sure people were sensitive to the external impacts and the other things that are on people's minds during this time. And then this larger sense, and there's a real opportunity here to demonstrate care within an organization. People are looking for a sense that the organization has their well-being in mind, as well as at the company level, at the team level. Does the manager care about me and my personal situation, those types of things. And so some things about safety that we'll weave throughout the conversation.
Christian, for a long time, we've talked about safety being one of those baseline things before engagement can exist and before it's a necessary component. Yeah. And we talk about it like, hey, if my parking lot were dangerous, right, and then I might not want to go to work. This has really gone to a completely different level when we talk about safety. Yeah. What if somebody doesn't feel safe about going to work? How would we manage through that? Because really, in order for that experience and that engagement to happen, there needs to be a level of safety. What are your thoughts around that, about people who don't feel safe and not going to work?
Safety is such an interesting aspect of the workplace experience. A lot of times we're talking about it in environments where it's more of a common concern. So manufacturing, healthcare has a lot of safety concerns just in general times. And but now it's come to the forefront. And if people don't feel safe, no matter how otherwise engaging their job is, it's a huge distraction. We can't overcome this basic need of security and safety. And so it has to be addressed before we can really work on the higher order magnitude of inviting people to engage. Hey, if I want you to bring your best self, all your innovation, your energy, and ideas to this role, if you don't feel safe, it's a non-starter. It's the cost of admission. We have to make sure these basic human needs are met. And so how do you deal with it? Well, hopefully we'll talk through a few of these things. Some of those elements up there I think are important, equipment. Now, even those physical items that we've got up there for physical safety, they also influence psychological safety. For example, one example I use of examples is one thing that DecisionWise did, not to pat ourselves on the back, I had nothing to do with this, but very quickly, and I give Jamie a lot of credit. Jamie is our office manager here. But very quickly I saw hand sanitizers all over the walls that we didn't have before. Suddenly those showed up very quickly. And I think they were a scarce commodity too, so it really stood out. But for me, not only did I feel, that yes, that cut down on the germs on people's hands, but I felt that the organization cared. I felt the psychological safety, just seeing some of those physical symbols of safety in the environment. So, there's a lot of different ways to address it. There's not one thing that you do. I think it's a combination of what you're doing at a macro, an organizational level, a micro, a team level, in ensuring that, and also just having the conversations. What are you concerned with? What would help you feel more safe? It's a real great time to strengthen feedback.
I would only comment that we don't have to remove all risk from the workplace. The requirement, and there was a question about this, like, do I have to could an employee ask to wait to come back to work until a vaccine were available? And the answer is you're required to do what reasonable people would do. And that's a tough standard, but that's the legal standard. You have to balance the need to meet make their experience meaningful and to build connection and create psychological safety with reality. But again, I iterate, our job isn't to protect everybody from all the problems in the world. Our job is to be reasonable.
Right, and I think that's a great point. We don't have to get this perfect, and good news, you're not going to get it perfect. But people have to see that it is a priority, it's part of the conversation. And let's not forget another huge priority, which is we have to be operational viable. We can't keep people safe if we go out of business doing it. And so that's something that has to be part of the conversation.
I'm going to turn to Dave here. Dave, the way businesses are working is different post-COVID-19. Maybe you could take some time and kind of address a few of these.
Yeah, I think, there, and I guess the way that we would look at this is that there's a lot of people on this webinar. There will be a lot of people that listen to this webinar, and every one of you is in a different situation. So keep that in mind as we go through this. I would love to give, a complete plan for all of you to return your workforces to full staffing. I would love to do that, but we're not able to do that. So we're going to be providing some guidelines, and some of you have been up until this point, and we have clients who've said, yeah, we've been mostly business as usual. Now, nobody's completely business as usual, but there have been organizations that have been business as usual. They've been deemed essential, and therefore they've had people coming to work this entire time. They'll probably still have some of their office staff have probably been working from home up until this point, but mostly they've been staffing their locations. There's also businesses that have been open but have transitioned mostly to work from home policy, and so some of those organizations are going to be coming back to work as well. And maybe some of those organizations have found that this work from home thing kind of works. That we've been just about as productive as we have been when people were in the office. And maybe you found exactly the opposite. It's either of these things could be true, but there's the businesses that have been in that situation. There's been businesses that are some hybrid of remote and non-remote workers, and there have been businesses that have been entirely shut down. Furlough most of your employees, and you're looking to open up retail locations or what have you. So all these things could be your case. It could be your situation. And we want you to understand, look, we're going to give you some principles and some ideas, but we understand all of you are in a little bit of a different situation. And so we'll try to give you some information here, but want to make sure that you're understanding that we're trying to speak to a very general audience here.
We want to just briefly touch on what makes or what's foundational to a great employee experience. And so, Christian, if I can turn that to you, can you kind of walk our participants on this webinar today kind of through how we talk about employee experience and its relationship to employee engagement?
Yeah, I think it's an important part of this conversation. So we often hear these terms used interchangeably, but they are different. So we've got some simple definitions to kind of help just set the stage here. Organizational culture, the quick definition, the way we do things around here. Everything about us is creating, reinforcing, adjusting our culture. The way an employee experiences that culture is the employee experience, or the impact of the culture on the employee is the employee experience. How a human being, interacts with the experience we're creating there. And based on that experience, the employee's emotional response to the employee experience is where we get employee engagement. If someone interacts with the culture, has an experience, it invites them to engage, they bring more of their best selves, that's where we're getting that engagement.
And we're actually seeing scores up right now. Can you talk a little bit about why that might be?
Yeah, there is and by the way, when I came into this, my goal was, I'm not going to say the new normal. I'm not going to say we're all in this together. And I've been fighting it. I think Justin's opened it up by saying, hi, we're here to talk about the new normal. But I
You should
can't
have told me about that beforehand. I would have repositioned.
It was a personal goal. I'll probably do it 5 or 6 more times, but there is, along the lines of we're in this all in this together, there is an elevation in scores we're seeing on those organizations surveying. We're seeing stronger connections to the organization itself. Those of you who've worked with us know we often measure at the job level, the team, the supervisor, and the organization level. Those organization level questions have jumped up quite a bit right now. There's a greater sense of connection, perhaps a greater sense of dependency, where we feel a sense of gratitude to be employed during some uncertainty, but also some appreciation for the actions we're seeing our leadership take, where empathy is coming to the surface, this greater sense of organizational care. And so we're seeing elevated scores across the board. Josh Burson, who's a voice in this space, he had a quote the other day that was, COVID-19 is the greatest thing that's happened to engagement. Now, I don't know if I agree with that completely, but there is something to be said for these events, how we treat each other, and how it impacts the average employee, because we are seeing those positive scores in the survey.
Dave, talk a little bit about our notion of planned and unplanned events, if you would.
When we think about everything that's happened over the last couple of months, I don't know that anybody necessarily had planned for what we've just experienced. So much of the experience that we have as employees or as managers in organizations, so much of what we do is just unplanned events. And you can see some of the unplanned events that we're showing that they're unpredictable. We don't know when they're going to happen. Mistakes happen, complaints happen, reductions in force happen. There's heavier workloads at times. There's lighter workloads at times. We just don't know when those times are always going to be. We can't always plan for them. There are some things that we can plan for. That's like, the hiring process, the onboarding process, anniversaries, promotions, the things that we know are coming. They're on the calendar. Therefore, we can plan for them. So as we look at our current situation, correct, nobody really planned for this. A lot of people were working from home and kind of planning on the fly, and they were responding to a very unplanned environment and trying to buoy up their employees. And I think a lot of organizations doing a great job of that in sort of crisis management mode. We've had a couple of months where we've been shut down, or most of the country and world has been shut down for the last couple of months. Now we're returning to work, or some people are returning to work, or at least phasing in to return to work. And we don't have the same excuse of we didn't know this was coming. And so this is something where we would err on the side of planning in this case. We don't want to set a date and just say, everybody, we'll see you on, I don't know, June 15th. Excited to be with you, and that's the end of planning. This is something that can be planned out. And again, when we're looking at an experience standpoint, we want to make sure that we have the skills and the necessary competencies in our leadership in order to deal with the unplanned times. But right now is an opportunity for us to be very planned in our approach to bringing people back to work.
So this is for both you, Christian and Dave. We've got some key return to work goals. It's what we're trying to accomplish as we become planners and move from the unplanned to the planned scenario. Let me put some of these up here, and then I'll ask you to kind of go through these.
Yeah, and I'll say first and foremost is going to be the health and well-being of of the people that you employ. So that's going to be, think of that as kind of a priority goal. If you don't get that part right, where people feel like they're not safe, just like we talked about with the psychological and physical safety, if people aren't feeling safe, it's going to be very hard to get the most out of them. It's going to be very hard to get anything out of them if they're not feeling safe. So that's going to be first and foremost. But beyond that, your definition of what your goal is could change. Here's some suggested goals. We think it might be a good idea to be operationally viable as you return people to work. We think that might be a good idea. It's probably a good goal. We think that it's a good goal to create a detailed plan for a phased-in workforce. And then we also think that, sorry, Christian, we think that there's a new normal.
It's right there.
Define the new normal. Yeah. So people's expectations have changed. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a really interesting outcome of this that I think is going to continue to evolve, but we've had to step out of our comfort zones and go remote. Many of us, for the first time, we've had to extend additional trust and autonomy so people could work outside of our offices and co-location, those types of things. And so expectations have changed. For many cases, most cases that I've run into, it's worked much better than we thought. And so now employee expectations are changing. And so where there's an anticipation of evolving flexibility policies and guidelines. And so, it might not be job one as you bring people back to work, but I think it's a conversation that you need to be prepared to have, and an expectation you need to set with leadership that these policies may need to be updated or evolve coming out of this, and thinking through what are the good things that we've learned from this experience that we want to keep for employees.
One thing that I think we've learned, Dave and I were chatting about this, is we used to kind of grit our way through sick days. We'd come into the office anyway. I don't think we're going to do that anymore. Right,
Not
Dave?
for a while.
Not for a while.
Yeah.
I think we've realized that that's bad social policy. You can stay home and you can, take care of yourself and protect others.
There has to be a certain amount of trust in this environment that we're in, especially as we return to work and we ask people to return to work. If you are asking people to return to work and they're telling you, can't come in, I'm sick, it may be a different conversation now than it's been in the past, or a different expectation, communicated or uncommunicated expectation that we would want people to stay home if they're sick because it's safer for everybody else if they're staying home. If they're sick, if that means that they're working from home while sick, that's okay too. But there has to be a certain amount of trust that is inserted into, if there's not trust currently, we've got to find a way to trust people. And if your employees are putting trust in you to bring them back safely, we also have to put trust in them when they say, hey, I'm not feeling well, or I'm at risk, or what have you, that we would be able to still maintain some level of flexibility right now. And then in the future, that's going to create different expectations than what we've seen in the past around people being sick.
Can I take this a little bit down, maybe a rabbit hole, but sorry about that. A lot of the folks that are on the webinar today are in the human resource department. They're in the people area, and they're used to working with people opportunities and people challenges. I see this as an opportunity for these people experiences, these employee experiences, to really disseminate throughout the organization, from the CEO to the top to the frontline person on the newest employee. Can you talk about how this responsibility should be shared, or how we need to be responsible for these people challenges throughout every level of the organization?
Yeah, one of the things we talk about outside of a COVID-19 conversation, within the COVID-19 conversation, is expanding ownership of the employee experience. It's one of the kind of this progression up a maturity model for building engagement that we've been studying and creating over the years. Expanding ownership, if it's seen as an HR only thing, if we delegate all employee experience to HR, there's extreme limitations to what's possible. It starts with HR. HR is always going to be the keepers of the flame, the owners of the center of excellence for this. However, for this to really take hold and for us to do some big things as an organization and to actively shepherd our culture and get the outcomes we're looking for, we need greater ownership. It goes from, typically the progression is it goes from HR to where senior leaders are seen as owning it. Then they buy in and commit. And then down the leadership structure where all managers understand their role in shaping and influencing the employee experience. And then ultimately all employees, that we all recognize, and this might seem a little idealistic, but we all recognize that each day we are co-creating what it feels like to work here, and that we all play a role in this, and we have a sense of ownership there. That's where some pretty incredible things are happening. And your point of bringing that up here is, I think, a good one, that COVID-19 has sped up a lot of things that were happening slowly. And so this is an opportunity to speed up and perhaps the expansion of that ownership. So if I'm in HR within one of these organizations, I'm planning a big coordinated effort to bring people back into the office. Some of these conversations are with managers. Okay, there's certain things we can plan on, and here are the things we know and we can do to create the right experience. There are certain things we can't plan, and here are the guiding principles or the components of our culture, our underlying core beliefs that you need to use to shape these experiences as they arise. And so I do think there's a real great opportunity to increase ownership and expand what's possible with the employee experience.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about, we're going to get to transparency and clarity as a key objective of the organization. There was a question that came through, and we'll get to a lot of these questions, but there was a question that kind of highlights this issue. And it was one where the participant in the webinar said, hey, we're gonna check fevers and we're gonna test people before they come in the door, and we're gonna need personal protective equipment to do that. We've been told the best practices is that we change out that equipment every time instead of sterilizing it, but that could get costly. Well, first, to answer that question, what you need to do is make sure that you've consulted an expert to document in your file that, in fact, you can safely clean and reuse equipment. I think you can, but you need that to protect yourself. And the next thing to do, though, I think is, hey, let your employees know that you're messaging that you care about them, the psychological safety. We're going to test you. We're also reusing equipment, but this is what we've done to ensure that that's a safe process. Make sure you close the loop, the communication loop, and that you can over-communicate as opposed to under-communicate.
Yeah, I mean, we're maybe not the best group to speak specifically on the sterilization and killing the germs themselves, but the experience component that Matt keyed on, I think, is key, right? If you're doing these things, make sure there's a good reason, anchored in with some authority, but also for your employees, help them understand that this is being done for them instead of to them, or as much as possible involve them in some of those decisions of, hey, we need to do something here. How do we best do this so it's the right experience for all of us? I think those are some components I would include around some of those things. And I applaud them for thinking it through at that level. How do we get this right and not send the wrong message?
So we believe that there's been a division of responsibilities. There's micro and macro considerations. Dave, do you want to walk through kind of how this concept works?
Well, essentially, and you might even say there's three different things that we need to worry about. One is what is the tone at the top, the executive leadership saying, what's the CEO saying, what's the president saying to the organization, and how's that being communicated? But beyond that, what most of our partners that we work with in HR are concerned about is what is the organizational support that we need to create? What's the environment that we need to create in order for things to be rolled out successfully for our managers and teams? So we would call that a macro consideration. What do we as an organization need to provide in terms of structure, in terms of supplies and equipment, versus what needs to be done at the person-to-person level? We can't, the executive leadership and HR is going to have a really hard time tailoring this approach to each individual employee, and we need to, again, place trust in managers to make decisions at the micro level that reflect the values of the organization and that reflect a very safe work environment while still being operationally viable. So we've got kind of these two different categories, and we'll talk about both of them. The macro considerations, some to think about. So something that you can do as either as a leadership team or as an HR is to be very clear about the policies and guidelines. Now, some things are going to be by way of policy, and some things are going to be by way of guidelines, and we trust you to follow the guidelines. So you might want to understand which ones are policies and which ones are guidelines, and very clearly communicate what do you have by policy and what do you have by guideline. And those guidelines are going to apply for both employees and customers. Customer-facing employees, they need to feel safe too. And you may need your customers to behave a little bit differently than they have in the past. I've certainly experienced that in grocery stores where you have to line up 6 feet apart and wear a mask and things like that. And so we may have different guidelines for our customers as well that we're using to protect our employees. So remote work flexibility, what's the policy? What's the guideline? How are meetings conducted? Is there a policy there? Is it just merely by guideline? And then social distancing guidelines or policies would also be something that you'd want to consider. But there may be other things that we haven't listed here that you may want to think about. Are there, this is a new thing that we're experiencing, so be open to the idea that you may set a policy and need to amend that policy as you go through time. Tone at the top is something we've talked about already. We really think that, as we get into this, there may be a temptation to kind of throw your hands up and say, I'm sorry, but this is the reality. We want to make sure that, as leaders of the organization, we're showing quite a bit of empathy for the experience that is right now. Both psychological and physical safety are huge concerns of your employees, and we want to make sure that empathy is a big part of the tone.
One thing I'll just add around that is we have one item in our survey that we ask very frequently, which is senior leaders have a clear understanding of what's going on in this organization. And honestly, that typically trends lower than you would expect. It's one of our lower benchmarks. It's a big conversation point for a lot of organizations. During COVID-19 surveys, that has gone up quite a bit. This tone at the top, there is a greater sense of connection, a belief that, okay, senior leaders are involved. And I think part of it is that they've seen greater presence and communication and some of that empathy that you're talking about there.
Transparency and clarity, I think, can be controlled from a central location, especially as we are instituting policies and guidelines and things are changing. Frequent communication for frequent changes is what we wrote on our slides. I think that's an important way to think about it. And I also want to say that communicating something once through one medium is not necessarily going to be the only way you need to communicate things right now. Making sure that message gets through to managers as they are speaking directly with employees, that they can communicate some of these new policies and guidelines. And in the changing landscape, we want to make sure that people know this can change, but this is what we're going. This is the direction we're going right now. being able to set guidelines for managers for creating detailed plans. We would encourage more the detailed team level plans to be more at the micro level rather than the macro level. But the organization needs to be able to set up a skeleton and say, these are the guidelines, these are our values, these are the things that we're trying to accomplish as our larger plan, and we trust you, director, manager, team lead, to make the right decisions for your team on an individual person-by-person basis. And then what are the frequently asked questions that you're getting right now, and publish the answers to those things.
Matt, can I just jump in here? So maybe could you share an idea or two for those on the webinar? How can we help our leaders set that right tone? Is there anything that you see that somebody could help a leader who might be struggling with tone, or the importance of that tone? Because one of the things that I think you're really good at is tone, and sharing a good tone with the company and those that you work with. What thoughts do you have around tone, especially at the top level?
I think, first of all, I think the top level needs to make it clear that I want to reiterate what Christian said. This is not an HR problem. This is a business problem. And business leaders and managers at all levels are responsible for making this work. HR is a support function to give them the tools and resources they need. So expectation number one needs to come from the top, and HR needs to remind its top leaders, hey, you need to tell the managers that they're responsible for the safety and psychological safety of their team. That is not an HR responsibility. That is a leadership responsibility. And then tone is set by the top. People will follow what they see their top leaders do. I wish there was an easier way to talk about it, but I think at the end of the day is model the behavior you want to see.
Yeah, we've seen some great examples out there. It's been refreshing to see some amazing examples of CEOs and executives and the things that they have done, and that needs to continue.
I even like just the question of, with the leadership team, hey, there's going to be a lot of unknowns. We're going to have to deal with some things as they come up. Some things we'll be able to plan on. But let's agree right now, what experience are we committed to creating for our employees through this?
Christian, we have a couple more bullet points on this slide. Provide tools and resources to safely return to work. I think we've kind of covered that. Do you want to, why did you feel it was necessary to seek feedback?
Well, part of it's expanding ownership. Part of it's a greater sense of care. Employees, we've got some nice statistical evidence that people feel cared for when they feel like they have a voice. I feel cared for when I feel like you're listening to me. And so there is a need to be heard, but also, all of us are smarter than any one of us, and so there's a great need to open up the wisdom of the group. In fact, one of the questions that came in was something we've seen many of our manufacturing clients deal with. Well, what if some of our workforce could go remote and others couldn't? We're in manufacturing, we're in production. I just saw that question in our chat. What do you do there? How do you handle some of the resentment and things like that? And we've seen part of the strength of that, and there's a few things to say to that, but one of it is, well, involve them in the solution. Hey, we want to keep production going. We need to keep jobs. We open the door for any solutions that we've got here. Well, how do we work to fix this? And we've seen some good idea generation, as well as just people feeling like they're part of the solution.
Yeah, and I go back and forth on that one too, because the question is, we have certain individuals that can easily work from home. A lot of them are executives, but our production staff, we need them at work. We need them shoulder to shoulder working in a production environment. That's when I go back and forth on, because on the one hand, there's kind of almost a societal obligation to make sure that we can keep people as far apart from each other as possible and not spread the disease. But there's an organizational obligation to your employees to show them that you're willing to do the same things that they're willing to do in order to keep your business up and going. And so what message are you sending if you say, look, all of our office employees can stay home, but all of our production staff have to be in the office? it's one that I struggle with. I don't know what the answer is, but I think every organization is going to have to answer that for themselves and be able to navigate that. If the decision is all of our office employees can continue to work from home and our production staff has to be there putting themselves and their families at risk, then how are we going to handle that?
Right. And I don't think there's one right answer. Mm-hmm. Like you said, it's complex. I've seen organizations open up different shifts so they could, have fewer people on lines at different times. I've seen, one conversation that's been interesting is part of the reason we're sending the office, and this differs by location, but we're sending the office people home, not just to keep them safe, but there are fewer people here. It keeps you safer. There's fewer people in the break room. There are not fewer people going in and out of the building, and so that's part of it. But it is a challenge. And if I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone on the line that's got to continue to work a shift there, those thoughts cross my mind. But I also think there's the psychological safety of, I'm glad production's continuing. I'm glad that we're keeping some of these jobs going.
Christian, you made the point, which is the decisions are going to vary from organization to organization, but a key component of the experience is take the time to you don't have to justify the decision, but tell them how you arrived at the decision. Right? Yeah. Just walk them through the process that respects them. Right. And you say, and this is how we arrived at it. And they may not like it, but at least you told them what went into it.
Especially if it involved input from employees.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, look, we talked to your shift managers. We talked to people on your team. This is the best we could do with the trade-offs we all have to make. Another question that came in seeking feedback, what are you asking? There's a few different directions. High level, we're seeing people just asking, tell us how you're feeling right now, what's going on, and as well as what do you need to feel better? What do you need to get your job done during this unusual time?
And if we just back up a step on that, when we're asking about seeking feedback, the reason why feedback is so important right now is we're in unprecedented times. So when there's not precedent, we don't know how to navigate the waters that we're currently in, then it's very unlikely that the initial ideas and policies and guidelines that we're setting are going to be 100% correct, or that they're going to resonate 100% correctly. And so seeking feedback means that we're getting back with our organization and saying, everything that we've done, are we getting the correct outcomes for everything that we've done? And if we're not getting the right outcomes, people aren't feeling safe, if we're not operational viable, let's get the feedback to figure out how to tweak it so that we can adjust this. Expect this to be not just one time decide and let it go. We want to decide, watch, monitor, seek feedback, and then make another decision based on that feedback.
I love that, because contribution is one of those things that really drives this feeling that I belong to a group and I want to see success. Let the employees contribute to this, because none of us has all the answers, but collectively we can come up with some pretty good solutions.
Right. Yeah.
We're going to make some suggestions at the end on a few specific questions you can do to measure. I love the comment that we just got from one of our participants. They said, we did ask our manufacturing employees the question of what are they worried about, and their comments were that they wanted fewer people in the building. Great, you have feedback, and maybe if that's not possible, you tell them how you arrived at that decision and how you're balancing all of the considerations that you're trying to balance.
Feedback is a great way to get ideas. It's also a great place to check your assumptions. We assume this is right, but let's see how people are processing.
Let's jump to tips for that manager, team leader, the micro level. Christian, can you start us off there?
Yeah, so the micro, we kind of, internally we've talked about federal versus states' rights a little bit as a conversation. What is the larger organization taking control of, and what are we empowering kind of the local environment? And maybe that's as political as I want to get. But what are we empowering the local environment or those team and manager settings to do? Or it might be a division, it might be a department, depending on what we think. But consider scale when you're thinking through the decision and the experience that you're creating for people coming back. And so Some ideas. Again, these are ideas, not an exhaustive list or something that is mandated across the board, of course. But holding virtual welcome back meetings. Recognize this as not just another day. It is an event to bring people back after something like this, and it is. People might be expecting and will benefit from some kind of formal
and just to
welcome
clarify
back.
on that, we're saying you might want to have these virtual meetings before that time, and because there's going to be a lot of questions, and I think managers are going to want to be able to get ahead of that, so they're not dealing with all those questions the day everybody starts, people start filing in for work. We want to get ahead of that, and we think it's a really good idea to put on calendar some virtual meetings to talk about and get some feedback even in those meetings about how are we going to do this.
Yeah. Yep. And in those sessions and in other interactions, acknowledge problems and struggles. Let's be authentic. Not everything's been great. Maybe this is a chance to explore that psychological safety, physical safety. That what are people afraid of? What are they feeling? But also celebrating the positives. There's some good things, that have happened, and let's hang on to those. Schedule frequent check-ins with all employees. And this is something you should do anyway across the board, but especially now. Yeah. We've actually rolled out a manager check-in tool, a simple free tool for people to stay connected with their employees. I use it. It's been great. But whatever you can do to keep and maybe increase the cadence for one-on-one check-ins with employees. Build time and space for people to reconnect while distancing, and it doesn't mean, hugs necessarily, but get, recognize that when we're bringing people back, let's take advantage of the opportunity to interact face to face and get a little bit of a closer distance with each other. So, create space for that and consider phased-in approach. Justin mentioned that we're bringing people back to DecisionWise, and it's going to be phased. We're going to be first working on groups. We're organizing our population into different groups and kind of scheduling different days for them to be in the office, and then we'll kind of go from there. But consider a phased approach, but also let some of those decisions be localized for managers. So if there's individuals that have unique needs and shouldn't be included in some of these early phased-in returns, give people flexibility. Managers are going to know the unique needs of their employees better than typically HR or executives will. And so sometimes we run the risk of a blanket plan being implemented that doesn't take into account some of the unique individual needs.
Yeah, and I want to just go back to this idea of building space for people to reconnect. Think about your employees. There's probably a few different camps of employees, different types of employees. Some that are terrified to come back to work. Some that just don't want to come back to work because working from home has been the best thing that's ever happened to them in their lives. And then there's the third group that really, really wants to reconnect with people, and really wants to be around people. And so we need to accept that. We need to accept the fact that people do want to reconnect. And we think it's a really good idea to set guidelines for that and also maybe even create a space for it where people can reconnect while still being safe and still keeping their distance.
So I have an example of that just happened upstairs in our lunchroom the other day. 2 employees that normally probably would have sat kind of closer together eating lunch, they were probably 15 feet apart but they were still talking to each other. They were just at tables kind of far apart, but they were still having that interaction. And I think that's what we're saying is you can figure out how to make it work, and people are adaptive that way.
Matt, Christian mentioned the manager check-in tool that we developed and released for free. We don't have a link for that on the website, but I will send that out to the participants in the email, access to what that tool is. So I'll make sure that they all have access to that tool. And it's been fantastic to see how that connection happens between manager and employee.
And just a little note on that. It was something we developed. Matt, I believe it was your idea. We developed it internally first, and we thought, no, this is great. Let's try to roll this out and give this to the world to interact with. But every week, the folks on my team have a minute, just a prompt to add a few sentences about their week in a few different categories. And then every Friday I get an email that summarizes it all. It's improved just how connected I am, and also my one-on-ones are more productive because I've got a list of everything, and it's been good.
Dave, we have up here a guiding principle: don't give up the gains.
Yeah, interesting thing that Christian has brought up, and I'm not sure that everybody would have expected this. I didn't know what to expect as we were continuing to survey some organizations as we've gone into this very weird time. I think I'm not sure that I expected this or didn't expect it, but let's just say, as Christian has mentioned, we've seen some gains in terms of connection, not to the people, not to the team, not to the manager necessarily, but to the organization and its leadership. That connection is such a critical part of employee experience that drives engagement. That connection that we have to our managers or to the leaders, the top leadership and the organization is such a huge part. And so there's been a lot of organizations that have done really good work in sort of a time of crisis. We're encouraging you not to give up the gains. There's a temptation over the last decade. It's been a situation where there have been so many jobs out there that people can kind of job hop a lot more. Right now, people are really thankful to have their jobs. They're really thankful. We know that. We acknowledge that. That's great. Part of that is feeling more connection to the organization. Let's not take advantage of the fact that people feel thankful for their jobs. Let's try to build on that. Let's take that gain and let's build on it.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this, where we've seen these increase in favorable perceptions. If I'm an HR leader, I would be looking for a conversation with my executive team to say, there are things about the way it feels to work at this organization that I don't want to lose, that we've gained in the last weeks and months, that I would like to protect and continue to preserve going forward. And today, I'm in the same boat as Dave was. I did not know what to expect. But we have seen these undeniable favorable gains. Now, I would expect if we don't do anything, those will level back off over time. My hope is that the world will return to something that we can count on as a little bit more stable here in the coming months. But as it does that, if we don't do anything, we'll go back to kind of the benchmark norms that we're used to seeing in employee perceptions. But I think it's a worthwhile conversation of, we've had this elevation in the employee experience, and we'd like to do what we can to preserve that going forward.
Yeah, I think we're trying to avoid the phrase, just be glad you have a job.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's try to avoid that. That's banned. Okay, this was our Pulse, some questions that we developed. You guys want to talk through this for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions.
And this might be hard for people to see, but the general idea was that we've created a Pulse survey that is designed for organizations that are returning to work, and some of the things that you want to monitor as people return to work. And Christian will probably be able to, he's a little closer to the screen than I am, be able to read this a little bit better than I could. But one of the things that I would say is, as you prepare for this, we think that this is a pretty good list of items to try to monitor.
Yeah.
Whether or not you survey on it, this is the good items to try to monitor as you're returning to work. And when we talk about receiving feedback or seeking feedback from employees, we want to be very specific. Yeah, we can do the "how are you feeling" sort of questions. I think those are very valid and valuable. However, also being very specific in terms of, these are some things that we've set as criteria for a successful return to work. Therefore, let's teach to the test a little bit and understand these are some of the outcomes that we're looking for. And if we were to survey, and if we do survey, we would want to see very strong numbers in these specific areas.
Yeah, so even if you're not going to survey, this is a nice kind of scorecard to use as you start to design your plans. Are we going to get these outcomes? And if you want to survey, even better. We love surveys here. So these are the items we developed, but not in. We thought it'd be a good part of this conversation just to give you some kind of outcomes to shoot for.
Justin, you want to lead us through some of the questions that are up?
Yeah, for sure. So first off, I'm glad to see this question come in a lot about will the slides be available. Historically, we don't make our slides available in these webinars. It's just a general practice, but I'm going to twist some arms and I'll work with the guys here and we'll make sure we make these slides available to you. That would include those questions that were just up there for you to use. From our standpoint, we'd love to help in any way where we can, but feel free to use them. What's most important is that we're monitoring what's going on and where we are in that process. So, Matt, we've really done a good job about talking through a lot of the questions. One component that I want to just touch on really quick, if we could bring that back to that micro level and the manager and monitoring and listening. Will you guys just talk about the importance of the manager in this process? Like, we've spent some time at the organizational level talking about the executives and the CEOs. Can you talk about the importance of the manager in this case?
Yeah, so a manager is the closest to the employee. All the things we know, you think through the best managers you've had and the experience they create for the team. They don't control everything in an organization, obviously, but they control a lot of the climate you interact with on a daily basis. We've got a lot of fascinating research about a manager's role in creating employee experience, inviting employee engagement, those types of things. Some of it specifically is dials in right in the way the manager talks about the organization. It's one thing for me to lead a team and get them to like me and to be loyal to my goals and to me. It's another and much more meaningful and productive thing if I connect them back to the organization. We call it writing for the brand, but and helping them see that. And so in our communication and our plans for bringing people back into the office, consider that manager and invite them and ask them to speak positively about the organization as they frame this return in this entire experience.
Yeah, that phrase "ride for the brand" comes from what it's like out here in the West when you signed on to a ranch. You were supposed to be loyal and faithful to that brand, and we can ask managers, as you said, Christian, to take care of that and to really do that. Yeah. Justin.
We've had a few come in. I appreciate people are not necessarily sharing or asking questions, but they're sharing ideas. And one of them goes in line with something that Dave talked about, that we've created these new environments and we have to keep that going. We can't go backwards. And some cool virtual meetings, and we have a company check-in like every 3 days now, and it's become fun that we have these trivia questions and everyone's going after it. It's been really fun to have that, and it's that type of thing that we need to try to. It's okay, and we need to continue those things and don't give up the gains, Dave, as you were talking about there. So. Well, thank you all very much. We are at the time, as I mentioned, this webinar does count for Sherman HRCI credits. I will email those out to everyone who has participated in this. For those who are watching on demand, again, send me an email at info@decisionwise.com and I'll get you those codes. As well as I'll make a few tweaks to the slide deck. I'll add in the manager check-in tool, login information, and links. And we'll send out an email. Usually I like to give it a little bit of time for those who will be watching on demand today. So either later this afternoon or early tomorrow, I will have that email in your hands. If you do not receive it, please feel free to reach right out to me at info@decisionwise.com. Again, thank you, Matt, Christian, Dave. This has been great. Thank you to everyone who has joined with us. It is a great opportunities that are ahead of us, and really is for the employees. The employee experience will be different, but different can be great. So thank you all very much.